Hello everyone and welcome. This presentation will provide a practical, high-yield approach to managing methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, bacteremia in adult patients. This guide is specifically designed for medical residents and students. Before we begin, please note that this presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult the latest clinical practice guidelines, your local institutional protocols, and, of course, your attending physician when making patient care decisions. The content presented here reflects evidence available as of early 2026. Let's start with the basics. Staphylococcus aureus is a gram-positive coccus that characteristically grows in grape-like clusters and forms distinctive golden-colored colonies when cultured on agar plates. It is one of the most versatile and formidable human pathogens we encounter in clinical practice. A critical distinction we must make at the outset is between methicillin-sensitive Staphylococcus aureus, or MSSA, and methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA. The resistance mechanism in MRSA is elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its clinical impact. These resistant strains produce an altered penicillin-binding protein, called P.2A, which is encoded by the MICA gene. This altered protein has a very low affinity for beta-lactam antibiotics. This single genetic change renders MRSA resistant to virtually all penicillins, carbapenems, and most cephalosporins, with the key exception of the advanced generation agents, which we'll discuss. As a teaching pearl, it's also useful to know that community-acquired MRSA, which is often the USA 300 strain and PVL positive, differs from hospital-acquired MRSA in its epidemiology and virulence, but the core principles of bacteremia management remain the same. To effectively manage Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia, I want you to remember a simple but powerful framework: the 5 pillars of management. Every single case of Staph aureus bacteremia, whether MSSA or MRSA, requires that you address all 5 of these pillars. First, appropriate anti-staphylococcal therapy. Second, source identification and control. Third, echocardiographic evaluation. Fourth, appropriate duration of therapy. And fifth, infectious disease consultation. This is now considered a standard of care, and for good reason. Multiple meta-analyses have shown that involving your infectious disease colleagues is associated with an approximately 50% reduction in 30-day mortality. So, when should your index of suspicion for MRSA be particularly high? There are several key clinical scenarios and risk factors. Be highly suspicious in any patient with a hospital-acquired or healthcare-associated infection. Other major risk factors include recent antibiotic exposure, and importantly, diabetes mellitus. Also be alert for patients with indwelling catheters, prosthetic devices, or dependence on hemodialysis. Those with a history of injection drug use, known prior MRSA colonization, and residents of long-term care facilities. And a critical point that cannot be overemphasized. In any patient with suspected bacteremia, you must always obtain blood cultures before starting empiric antibiotics. When MRSA bacteremia is suspected or confirmed, we have 3 excellent first-line agents. These are Vancomycin, a glycopeptide that inhibits cell wall synthesis; Daptomycin, a cyclic lipopeptide that disrupts the cell membrane; and Ceftobiprole, an advanced generation cephalosporin that is unique in its ability to bind P.2A, making it bactericidal against MRSA. Now let's talk about vancomycin. There has been a major practice-changing shift in how we monitor this drug. Area under the curve, or AUC-guided dosing, with a target AUC to MIC ratio of 400 to 600, is now the sole recommended monitoring approach for serious MRSA infections. The 2020 revised consensus guidelines from the Infectious Diseases Society of America and other major societies explicitly abandoned trough-only monitoring. Why? Because it was shown to cause increased nephrotoxicity without any improvement in efficacy. So, trough-only monitoring is no longer recommended. According to the 2025 JAMA review by Tong and colleagues, the case fatality rate for Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia overall is between 15 and 30%, with MRSA rates typically at the higher end of this range. As a key teaching pearl on this topic, be aware of MIC creep. If your lab reports a vancomycin MIC of 2 micrograms per milliliter, be aware that clinical failure rates increase significantly. In these cases, you should strongly consider switching to an alternative agent like Daptomycin or Ceftobiprole. Next is Daptomycin. There are a few critical points to remember when using this agent. First, dosing. While the Food and Drug Administration approved dose is 6 mg per kilogram once daily, many infectious disease experts now recommend higher doses of 8 to 10 mg per kilogram for serious infections like bacteremia and endocarditis. Second, a classic board question. Daptomycin must not be used for pneumonia, as it is inactivated by pulmonary surfactant. Finally, safety monitoring. You must monitor creatine phosphokinase, or CPK, weekly to watch for myopathy. The drug should be discontinued if the patient develops symptomatic myopathy with a CPK 5 times or more the upper limit of normal, or if they are asymptomatic but their CPK rises to 10 times or more the upper limit of normal. Let's dedicate a moment to our newest first-line option, Ceftobiprole, or Zevtera. It is an advanced generation cephalosporin, and it represents a significant advance. It was approved by the Food and Drug Administration in April of 2024. Its approved indications include Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia and right-sided infective endocarditis, including cases caused by MRSA. Its mechanism is key. It effectively binds to P.2A, the altered penicillin-binding protein in MRSA, which restores the bactericidal activity that other beta-lactams lose. The pivotal ERADICATE Phase 3 trial demonstrated its non-inferiority to Daptomycin, making it the first new agent approved for this indication in over 15 years. It is just as important to know which agents to use as it is to know which agents not to use, or when to use them with caution. First, Linezolid. It is critical to understand that Linezolid is considered a salvage or alternative agent. It is not first line for MRSA bacteremia. It lacks Food and Drug Administration approval for this indication, and in fact, the FDA label notes mortality concerns in catheter-related bloodstream infections. Next, Dalbavancin. This agent should only be considered as an off-label consolidation option for the completion of therapy in selected patients with complicated Staph aureus bacteremia after their blood cultures have cleared. The DOTS trial, published in JAMA in 2025, did not show superiority on its primary endpoint. It only met non-inferiority for a secondary clinical efficacy endpoint. Importantly, this trial excluded high-risk patients like those with left-sided endocarditis, central nervous system infections, or retained prosthetic material. Finally, a few agents to avoid. Aureus and Tedazolid are only approved for skin and soft tissue infections, not bacteremia. And importantly, clindamycin and tigecycline should not be used for Staph aureus bacteremia due to inadequate bactericidal activity. If you remember only one thing from this lecture, let it be this: source control is the cornerstone of management for Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia. Antibiotics alone are often insufficient. When bacteremia persists despite appropriate antibiotic therapy, source control is always the first priority. A significant complication of Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia is infective endocarditis, which develops in approximately 12% of patients. We have two main tools: the transthoracic echocardiogram, or TTE, and the transesophageal echocardiogram, or TE. The TTE is a good initial screen for all patients, but its sensitivity is only around 60%. The TE is far more sensitive at greater than 90%, and it is indicated for high-risk patients. To help guide this decision, you can use a validated tool like the VIRSTA score to estimate a patient's risk of endocarditis. The VIRSTA score incorporates factors such as community-acquired infection, the presence of permanent intracardiac devices, persistent bacteremia at 48 hours, severe sepsis or shock, and elevated C-reactive protein. A low score of less than 3 may allow you to safely forego a TE in certain low-risk patients. The duration of therapy depends entirely on the complexity of the disease, not on your choice of antibiotic. There are 5 strict criteria for uncomplicated bacteremia, and all of them must be met. First, endocarditis has been excluded. Second, there are no implanted prostheses. Third, follow-up blood cultures drawn 2 to 4 days after the initial set are negative. Fourth, the patient's fever resolves within 72 hours of starting effective therapy. And fifth, there is no evidence of metastatic infection on physical examination. If even one of these criteria is absent, the patient has complicated bacteremia and requires a longer course of treatment. Now for a fundamental management step, the blood culture clearance protocol. The standard of care requires that you repeat blood cultures every 24 to 48 hours until you have documented clearance of the bacteremia. And here is the critical teaching point. The duration of therapy is counted from the date of the first negative blood culture, not from the day you initiated treatment. This is a common point of confusion, and getting it right is essential for ensuring patients receive an adequate course of therapy. What do you do when your initial treatment fails? We define persistent bacteremia as positive blood cultures at 48 hours or more after starting appropriate therapy. This is unfortunately common, occurring in about 30% of patients, and it carries a grim prognosis with a 90-day mortality of 39%. Here is your step-by-step approach. Step 1, and always step 1, is source control first. You must aggressively reevaluate for any undrained foci, remove devices, and obtain advanced imaging. Step 2 is antibiotic adjustment. If the patient is on vancomycin, you should switch to daptomycin at a dose of 8 to 10 milligrams per kilogram. If the patient is already on daptomycin, you should add ceftobiprole. Step 3 is to obtain a mandatory infectious disease consultation. A question that often comes up is whether patients with Staph aureus bacteremia can be switched to oral antibiotics to complete their treatment. The SABATO trial, published in 2024, demonstrated non-inferiority of early oral switch after 5 to 7 days of intravenous therapy in carefully selected low-risk patients. However, this applies only to a small subset, about 23%, of patients meeting strict low-risk criteria. These criteria include no deep-seated focus of infection, no septic shock within 4 days, no prolonged bacteremia greater than 72 hours, no fever in the 2 days prior to randomization, and removal of intravascular catheters within 4 days. For most patients with Staph aureus bacteremia, a full intravenous course remains standard. Importantly, the SABATO trial included very few MRSA patients, only 16 out of 213, limiting its generalizability to MRSA bacteremia. You will often encounter the question of whether combination therapy improves outcomes in MRSA bacteremia. While some promising pilot data exists, the definitive trial, CAMERA-2, gave us a clear answer. This trial, published in JAMA in 2020, found that adding an anti-staphylococcal beta-lactam to standard therapy with vancomycin or daptomycin did not improve the primary composite outcome and was associated with significantly more acute kidney injury. Notably, the increased nephrotoxicity in CAMERA-2 was driven primarily by the combination of vancomycin with flucloxacillin, a hydrophobic beta-lactam. Hydrophilic beta-lactams like ceftobiprole may have a more favorable safety profile when combined with daptomycin. Therefore, the current recommendation is that routine use of combination therapy is not recommended. That said, in cases of truly persistent bacteremia that has failed monotherapy and source control, combination therapy may still be considered on a case-by-case basis with infectious disease guidance. But this is salvage, not routine. As I mentioned in our 5 pillars, infectious disease consultation is now considered a critical quality of care standard. The data are clear. Involving an infectious disease specialist for Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia is associated with an approximately 50% reduction in 30-day mortality. The benefits are numerous. Infectious disease specialists help ensure appropriate antibiotic selection and dosing, guide the duration of therapy, facilitate the appropriate echocardiographic evaluation, and identify the need for source control. The recommendation is simple and direct. Obtain an infectious disease consultation for all cases of Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia. Alright, let's summarize with some high-yield points for your board exams and clinical practice. First-line agents are Vancomycin, Daptomycin, and Ceftobiprole. For Vancomycin, use AUC-guided dosing, and consider switching if the MIC is high, at 2 or greater. Daptomycin is not for pneumonia. Combination therapy is not for routine use, based on the CAMERA-2 trial. The SABATO trial provides evidence for oral step-down in select low-risk patients. Repeat blood cultures every 24 to 48 hours until clearance, and remember that your duration of therapy starts from the first negative culture. And finally, an infectious disease consultation reduces mortality by approximately 50%. This presentation has provided a focused overview of the management of MRSA bacteremia. This is a field that is constantly evolving, with new agents and emerging evidence changing how we approach this challenging infection. Therefore, I'll leave you with a call to action. First, always refer to the latest clinical practice guidelines. Second, consult with your infectious diseases team early and often. Third, I encourage you to read the full 2025 JAMA review by Tong and colleagues. And finally, always perform your own analysis of the evidence for each individual patient you manage. Thank you for your time and attention.